They say Richard D. Wyckoff never talked openly about stop losses, but what if I told you that was his most intentional silence? Every trader knows the sting of a stop loss. Hit that moment when price seems to hunt your level, reverse instantly, and leave you watching helplessly as the market moves without you. But Wyckoff, he viewed this entire emotional cycle as a weapon of manipulation. He understood that the market's biggest operators, the composite man, as he called him, needed your stops to survive. Wyckoff never left a direct blueprint on stop-loss placement, not because he didn't believe in them, but because he believed you should never be the liquidity. Now, that's the line that most people miss. Wyckoff didn't teach stop-loss mechanics. He taught stop-loss philosophy. He wanted you to stop thinking like prey and start thinking like the hunter. See, back in the early 1900s, tape reading was the battlefield. Every tick of price represented emotion, fear, greed, hesitation, and Wyckoff could feel it in the flow. He noticed something uncanny whenever public traders placed tight stops just below support or above resistance. The market always seemed to reach for them first. The composite man, that invisible force Wyckoff described, used those clustered stop levels as fuel. He'd trigger the stops, absorb liquidity, and then launch the real move. That's why Wyckoff's silence on stop losses wasn't omission. It was revelation. He didn't want you to think about how much you could lose. He wanted you to think about where they wanted you to lose. So today, we're going to decode the unspoken stop-loss secrets of Richard D. Wyckoff, how he read the tape to avoid traps, how he positioned with the composite man instead of against him, and why modern traders still misunderstand this timeless edge. Before we go deeper, I want you to ask yourself, have you ever been stopped out perfectly before a big move? If so, comment below. What did that moment teach you? We'll go straight into the battlefield of psychology, the invisible war between your fear of loss and the operator's need for your liquidity. And once you see it through Wyckoff's eyes, you'll never place a stop the same way again. The greatest paradox of trading is this: the moment you try to protect yourself, you make yourself visible to the enemy. Every trader who's ever placed a stop loss knows that quiet dread, the whisper of fear that maybe, just maybe, the market knows where you're hiding. Wyckoff knew it too. He saw this behavior on the ticker tape every single day in the early 1900s waves of buying and selling that weren't just random, they were engineered emotion. He called it the composite operation. Large operators would test supply and shake out weak holders. And those weak holders? They were the ones who placed stops in predictable clusters. It's not that stop losses are bad. Wyckoff never said that. He believed discipline was sacred. But he warned against the mechanical mindset, the idea that risk management was about numbers alone. He saw risk as a function of understanding behavior. If you understood how and why price moved, your stop wasn't a price level. It was a logical point of invalidation. That's a critical distinction. Because when you place a stop loss just below support or right under a spring formation, you're not hiding, you're advertising. You're sending a signal to the composite man, here. This is where my fear lives. And he listens. In Wyckoff's studies, he described how markets would often dip below support to test supply, triggering stops, creating panic, and then once the weak hands were gone, the true markup began. Modern traders call it a stop hunt. Wyckoff called it a test. Different words. Same trap. But here's where the real paradox unfolds. If you don't use stops, you risk ruin. If you use them blindly, you invite manipulation. So what's the way out? Wyckoff's answer was subtle: alignment over reaction. You must understand the story of price before you choose your stop. If the composite man is in accumulation, he wants fear. He needs liquidity to build. If you recognize that phase early, you'll know your stop should sit where his interest ends, not where yours begins. That's not luck, that's psychological symmetry. So let me ask you, if you could place your stop knowing exactly where the professionals don't care anymore, how would that change your mindset? Comment below, because in Section 3, We'll break down Wyckoff's unspoken blueprint for placing stops with the Composite Man, not against him, and how to turn manipulation into confirmation. Wyckoff didn't use stop losses to survive the market, he used them to synchronize with it. Imagine standing beside Richard D. Wyckoff in 1923 in the quiet hum of his Manhattan office. The ticker tape clicks relentlessly. He's watching prices scroll, not numbers, but narratives. Each uptick and downtick whispering intentions, not randomness. He leans forward, pencil in hand, marking the tape, noting volume surges. Pauses in the spread. Moments when the Composite Man tests the market's conviction. To Wyckoff, this wasn't noise, it was conversation. Now, here's what he would never say directly, but always implied. A stop loss wasn't a line in the sand. It was a checkpoint of truth, a place to measure whether the story of price was still valid. If price violated that story, he exited. Not because his stop got hit, but because his understanding was wrong. That's the difference between being hunted and being in command. He understood that markets move in phases: accumulation, markup, distribution, markdown. Each phase had its own battlefield, its own psychological terrain. So instead of placing stops at support or resistance, Wyckoff placed them at narrative failure points. The levels where the Composite Man's intentions would be proven false. That's how he avoided becoming liquidity. He didn't run from manipulation, he studied it, timed it, and used it. So when you see a spring, that sharp move below support, don't panic. Ask yourself, is this weakness or preparation? When you see a breakout, don't chase. Ask, is this strength or distribution disguised as euphoria? Because your stop should never sit where your fear lives. It should sit where the story dies. That's Wyckoff's unspoken stop-loss secret. He didn't hide it in a formula, he hid it in philosophy. He wanted traders to become interpreters of intent, not victims of volatility. And maybe that's the ultimate test of discipline. Can you detach from the market's drama long enough to listen to its dialogue? Because the next time your stop gets hit, remember, it's not the market punishing you. It's the market teaching you where you misunderstood the story. So tell me, if Wyckoff were alive today and he could see your charts, your stops, your trades, what lesson do you think he'd write about you? Comment below. And remember, the market doesn't hide truth, it hides intent. Your job is to read it. Quietly, patiently, like Wyckoff did.